when a negative feeling is triggered during a conflict, it is you can use that as a more emotional compass to understand that one of your needs were not met. So it's usually what's happening if you feel angry, sad, or frustrated, anxious. Something that you needed didn't happen. And so there's something that needs to be brought to light. Hi, I am Sophie, and this is the Rise and Play podcast. In the show, I sit down with influential thought leaders of the gaming industry to deconstruct how they create the best team and company cultures in order to create the best games. Every episode brings actionable insight to improve your leadership, self-awareness, and emotional management skills. Because becoming a better leader starts with becoming a better human. So, are you ready to unlock your full potential in life and business? Let's begin. Don't just see the future, know the future with today's sponsor, Thorsten. They make it easy to identify how your audiences and players actually play and what keeps them coming back for more. In a previous life, I used Thorsten Product Navigator for a game in soft launch and discovered that my audience was more complex than I thought. Instead of one homogeneous group, I was able to identify two unique personas, take a series of calculated risks in our game design, and strike a balance between the two groups. Our approach shifted from making a game for everyone to creating a personal experience for our most valuable players. And we were able to put our resources and time to good use and launch our game with a high level of confidence in its success. Visit go.thorsten.io/riseandplay, that's SOLSTEN, for a demo and receive 30% off your first Thorsten engagement crafted to your studio's needs. Learn why EA, Supercell, Wooga, and more use Thorsten to create the best human-centric gaming experiences possible.
Here we are. How are you doing, Sophie? Okay?
Yeah, very good. Thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Right. So for those that are listening in for the first time, we'll go through some introductions. So I'm Paul. I work for Evolution Recruitment Solutions. I run the gaming division here. And that basically means that we handle the recruitment sides of freelancers within the gaming industry across the whole of Europe pretty much now. And we also run a gaming podcast of our own because we want to be close to the gaming community. So if we know about what's going on, if we know about what the challenges are, then that's how we can do our business side of the freelance stuff to a better level. So, Sophie, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you work, what you do, and a bit about your podcast as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here for a fancy live workshop. I'm currently the general manager at Savage Game Studio, brand new studio owned by PlayStation. And before, I've worked mostly the past 14 years, I think, mobile games, free to play. So I've worked at companies such as Gameloft, Wooga, Rovio, and mostly in product management, team management, and then now more on a company management level. And something that I've been really passionate about and why also I'm here today was that as I was really focused on trying to make better games, I realized, all the focus and the work is also building a better culture for the team and eventually a company culture. And that's what led me as well to create the platform of conscious leadership, Rise and Play, and with the podcast and a lot of insights from many other leaders of the industry, and also doing workshop like we are doing today to equip all the I would say growing leaders, future leaders, or current leaders that are facing those challenges.
Why specifically is this the topic that you've chosen to do a workshop on?
Well, first of all, I have got into it more personally because I think I had the realization also during the pandemic. I was building my first studio and I couldn't see how the team was dealing with, their own personal challenges at home, and we didn't really know each other. And I had also my own interpersonal challenges, like personal life. And I realized I need to have better tools. And I was reading a lot about it. And then I ended up on finding nonviolent communication. I think I discovered it through other books. And what the tool provided was really a clear and structured framework on how to communicate with others in a nonviolent way. But what it means mostly is what I found, especially in workplace, we're full of passion when we make games. Emotions are there, and put it the layer on top of being at home and feeling a bit anxious sometimes. And we don't always manage to express what we really meant to say. And then we end up caught in a very emotional talk that escalates. It's like, how did we get there? And I've seen that many times in my career. I've been also entangled in those. And I thought it would be really helpful to help and support others to provide that framework, and not only for leads, actually anyone who wants to improve their communication, being understood, expressing what they need with their team, colleagues, or even, in a relationship, friends. It helps everywhere.
You've also said that you run your own gaming podcast. Do you want to go into a bit of detail about your audience there, the types of topics that you cover, types of people that you get involved, and so on?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, as I started the platform Rise and Play, it started actually with an online masterclass. So you also find it on the website of riseandplay.io. The thing is that I have observed, we are still a young industry, and I saw many new companies and also young team leads and taking responsibility quickly because it's just growing super fast. And I saw, as we are taking the roles and responsibility, the knowledge is not catching up. So I saw really a gap in terms of management, leadership skills that we were missing for anyone who's a new lead. And it's not just enough to be just competent in your job, but what is it? What does it imply in terms of communication, responsibility, self-awareness? Basically, when you are a leader of a group, you are a multiplier. You are not an individual contributor anymore. And not everyone understands the switch. And so what I wanted to provide with that platform was knowledge, my own experience building a studio from scratch when I was at Voodoo. Mm-hmm. And then it evolved into the podcast, which opened the knowledge to other leaders of industry. So there I've invited many executive, CEO to COO or team lead or even senior people, all the levels that have responsibility to share their experience and how they practice self-awareness, how they manage the team, how they communicate, how they do change management. So you can find a lot of resources there, how also to have difficult conversation, managing up, those things that we don't talk so much about. So I wanted to also offer more content talking about leadership, the important thing, how do you build a company culture? Because I saw as well a bit of an imbalance in all the talks of tactical talks around how do we make this game a hit game, make money, or a marketing strategy, and all of those are necessary, but there were not so much content, at least on specifically leadership. And the audience there are basically anyone who is interested in leading one day or already leading. And so it's a platform to learn a lot from each other. How do we make our salary transparent in the organization, for example? What are the implications? How do we design a workplace that is inclusive for parents when they return to work? How do we make it easier for them? So those kind of conversations, very progressive, that are happening also on those channels.
So also this topic that we're going to discuss today, is that something that you've covered in one of your podcasts before?
So I have not covered it in the podcast, so that's a great opportunity today. I have done it as an internal workshop, actually, a leadership workshop to train the whole company about the principle of nonviolent communication. So it was mostly internal knowledge, so I'm happy to share it outside to a broader audience today.
Brilliant. Well, I say that we should kick off with the workshop then.
So let me start first with the definition and what is nonviolent communication, or we talk more about it as NVC. So nonviolent communication, and I took this from a book, I'll share the reference later, is also called compassionate communication or collaborative communication. It's basically an approach to communication based on principle of nonviolence. So that's kind of a more official definition, but let me elaborate more here, where it's really not a technique to end disagreements, to prove your point right. So it's not a technique to convince or persuade others, but it's really to understand the other viewpoint. So the goal here is not to have your point across or reason someone, but it's to find the language to understand each other and listen to each other. So the focus here is really understanding the other. And that's a very important principle in nonviolent communication, and where it's effective, because on both sides, you are coming from a place where you want to understand more each other and then are open to listen to each other. And I'll give example later. It's harder to make it work when on the other side you have someone who's trying to show you right, or you are doing this and using this method. It's going to end in an emotional way as well. So that's really important as a premise when you are approaching using the framework. What is the intention of the talk? And what are the key outcomes today for you as I'm sharing more about nonviolent communication framework. First is some tools to express more with kindness in general, because what is triggering people usually and why talks get in an emotional state is what people think they heard from you, understood from you. So there was a confusion, and then what you say may appear unkind. So when most of the time people come with best intention of what they want to say, but don't express always in the way they can. So here it's helping you to express your thoughts fully with kindness and being able to express yourself, how you feel. And it's also not an uncommon word in the workplace, but I explain about that without this being seen as a blame or critique. And the other outcome is not just also here giving and giving your feedback, giving how you feel, but receiving as well, learning how to receive when someone else is expressing to you how they feel, what they need. And are you also kind, and are you receiving with empathy what you hear? So like I said, it has to be on both sides to work fully, because if one side is trying and the other is not empathetic, then it's a little harder.
Yeah, I think that second point that you made there in terms of receiving it, a lot of the times, depending on the mood that you're in, that can impact greatly how you take feedback from somebody, because they may say it in a perfectly reasonable way, but if you woke up on the wrong side of the bed, as they say, everything that you're hearing coming at you might just be all negative. Do you know what I mean? So learning how to handle receiving feedback is definitely an important tool to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said as well, like the way you receive is important, because you can also sometimes discard imagine someone is trying also to approach you with an NVC way, and despite their efforts, like you brushing off their needs. So it's important to be aware when a person also is using that framework. And I also share later more practical tools. The best is like announcing it when you get into the talk. I'm going to use the NVC framework to express what I said, because there's something that is heavy for me to express, so I'll use the framework so the two parties are aware. So it's a very simple framework, simple to understand, much harder to apply, but I'll go through it today. So first step is observation. Second step is feeling the feelings, expressing. Third is understanding the needs and expressing those. And then last is how do you frame the request or what you want to ask. So I'll go through all the steps of the framework and what that means. So examples first on observation. So the first step of the framework is you have to observe what has happened. So usually there's something you want to say and something that offended you or something that upset you. So before even getting started, collect the facts. What have happened? So what is an observation? It's not what you think. It's really important to separate it from a judgment, but it's what you can see, hear, or touch. A fact is not an interpretation of subjective opinion of an event. And that's what we have and we confuse most of the time. What we see or what we think or interpret, we take this as facts. And this is where also it goes in a really, I would say, heavy conversation.
Yeah.
And a good trick I use usually for you to ask yourself, what is an observation? Imagine you're on a cinema set and you're watching a scene. And if you are through a camera lens, what you see, you are able to describe, that's a fact. If, for example, you see a character, that person feels upset because they're throwing their face, whatever, this is already a judgment. But what you see the person is doing, if they are raising their hands or shake, I don't know, something they do, that is a fact. Or if they're leaving the room, raising their voice, it's a fact. But what's happening inside them, it's not a fact. So it's really important to focus on observation as you approach the conversation. And I give concrete example here. So an NVC example, like typical example of workplace, when I mentioned to him the negative news, he frowned his face, he stayed silent for a moment, stopped smiling, he said, okay. So all the sentences I'm giving here are just facts, descriptive. I'm not even making an interpretation. I'm explaining like in a script what has happened. What is not an observation, in the same situation, when I mentioned to him the negative news, he looked dissatisfied. He stopped talking because he was upset. So it's already an interpretation from my end of what I think has happened. Yes. He said things were okay. Well, I know it's not true. And then what happens? Even another layer, it's my own judgment. He's a liar and not trustworthy. And that happens all the time as we're having conversation and as we observe the situation. So remind yourself as well, is this a feeling? Is this a judgment you're having, or is this a fact? As you are collecting like what has happened, trying to analyze. And the second step is feelings. So feelings, what are they? And it's a really hard one because not everyone is connected to the feelings, understand what are feelings. Usually feelings, you can feel them through body, emotions, and sensations. So it's again, it requires some skills, training, to understand what is the body sensation. But I give example, for example, when you have anger, usually you have a bit of like, it feels sore around the shoulder, neck, and it's like you feel a bit stuck.
Tension builds up.
Yeah. So you can recognize when you're angry. When there's fear, it's more in the stomach, in the guts. It's like, there's something that I'm anxious, And sadness is in the chest and the pain. So being able to locate your feelings, the body sensation, and identifying the emotion. So this is another piece of work that I'm not getting into today, but that's a very important part because then you are able to express what's happening. But that's a fundamental step to be able to communicate with the other. And what is happening most of the time in the workplace, especially, is that we are confusing feelings and thoughts. So we have a lot of thoughts coming and it's like, I feel something, or I feel, and it's not feelings. And I'll give an example here. When we say, I feel that you have disappointed me, or you have done something in my back, or I feel that it was unfair. It is not a feeling, it's a thought. So a good trick here, every time you have a that after feel, you know that it's not a feeling. Because a feeling is, I feel something. It's an adjective. And I'm giving you a list of many negative feelings here. And we are not so emotionally literate when it comes to emotions and express ourselves. But there are many, many adjectives and words to express an emotion. And those are examples of emotions. And usually we say, I feel good, I feel bad. That's a very binary kind of a level of expression. But as we develop our vocabulary, there are many ways of expressing the palette of emotion. So again, I'm not going into that today, but it's just to be aware that when you don't have a word to express the emotion, maybe you can spend more time thinking or feeling it to identify what's happening. And so what happens when we confuse feeling and thoughts? Well, an NVC example here, I remove that and I say, I felt anxious of not knowing what was going on his mind. That's the feeling. And I'm feeling, so something not knowing what was going on in his mind is what is affecting me, and I feel anxious as a consequence. What is not a good example, I felt, which actually I thought, that he was angry at me. That's kind of I'm doing a shortcut here, but basically that person, what they've done, is making me feel angry. That's their fault, so it's already in the blaming mode, and we are already interpreting a lot of things. So it's really important to separate once again your feeling and what has caused it, but it's your feeling, it's yours. No one has made you feel this way. It's inside you. It's you are feeling the feeling. So it's important to own as well the feeling. And then needs, coming to the needs. By the way, this is used a lot in psychotherapy and relationship therapy. So in case you can relate to that more, the needs.
But this is all basically to allow us to be able to communicate with our colleagues and friends and family better, so that we can actually not just tell them how we feel in a more literate way, but also why. So you're combining the feeling and the thought and not getting them confused, essentially, on that point.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And so for the needs is the other component after the feelings, and they are universal human needs. So what's the principle behind here? We all as humans have needs. Like no one has no needs. It's not true. If you think you don't have needs, you do have needs, and you have a right to have needs. You have the right to have them, and you have the right to serve them, and you have the right to express them. So that's the foundation of like human rights and respect. And so when a negative feeling is happening, is triggered during a conflict, it is you can use that as a moral emotional compass to understand that one of your needs were not met. So it's usually what's happening if you feel angry, sad, or frustrated, anxious, something that you needed didn't happen. And so there's something that needs to be brought to light. And like I said, everyone, and this is where as well, it's important in a company to create the environment where everyone as an individual feels like they are accepted as a human with their rights. And you are not just here to work and leave your feelings at the door because we don't care about your feelings. It's not very welcoming, and it's not very realistic. So here, for people who are at our organizational level leaders, are you creating the place where people feel that their need to be respected, because they are?
Yeah, I was going to say that goes beyond leadership, though. That's everybody across the entire organization. So.
Yes. So needs, there's two layers of that. So first, it's understanding the feeling. So with the previous example, I felt anxious of not knowing what was going on in his mind. The need, and this is taking some reflection work. So again, this takes practice, journaling, time, go for a walk. Some people go for a run, whatever works. When you have because what's happening with a feeling, your nervous system is activated. So you're thinking very narrow. So suddenly everything that looks positive looks negative. All the opportunities become like constraints. So when you are overwhelmed, it's important to take a step back. Don't do anything. You're not thinking in your most intelligent mind. So take down, lower the nervous system, and then you can actually understand the need. And like in that example, what is the need? And it's example also for myself. So that's why I wrote it with the I. The need is I needed security and reassurance that this person will not do to harm me. That's more what's the need behind the feeling. Like, why am I anxious? I'm afraid, and I need some sign that it's okay, actually, that that person will not do any harm for me. It's an example, but it's really important in the process that you separate the feeling from the need, because for the last part, what are we expressing? So the last part, which is the most important one in the communication, so all the things I shared before are really more the background work. It's like you don't need the other person to be there and sitting and looking at you while you're doing this. So it's better to always make time. Time is on your side to process, and then you frame your request. So request, it's important as well, they are not demands. So you're not demanding something. I demand you to respect me. I demand reassurance. It's always a wish. You're expressing a wish, a request. And that means also the person has the right to say no to this. And it's also okay. So when that happens, it's really important as well to create kind of this more nurturing environment. You don't get triggered by a no, because then that means like, okay, it's a demand. But understanding as well, maybe the person has their own triggers, has their own needs unmet, and there's a reason why they say no, and what is preventing them from saying no. So you can also use that like as a tool when there's a no in your request. Why is there a no? What is preventing? And maybe it's the chance, tell me what is preventing you from saying no. I want to understand. And then the other one, it will start to do the NVC framework as well. Yeah. So example here, a counter example of what is not a request. I don't like when you are staying silent. This is not very professional. So let's say you have done the whole process, like, okay, I'm super pumped, I'm anxious, I'm angry, and I'm going to communicate to my boss or my colleague. I'm not happy about them, right? And so I start the conversation. I don't like when you're staying silent. This is not very professional. You always do that, which makes me feel nervous. Can you tell me what's going on? What do you think, by the way, is happening when you approach someone like this?
It's very combative, isn't it? You're basically giving a direct statement and telling them exactly what it is. And, you know, they're not going to approach that response well. So you're already starting the conversation on the wrong foot without seeking to understand the reason behind why they're staying silent in the first place. Because we all have people in our meetings that don't contribute as much at times. So understanding why they're potentially not contributing, seeking to understand why is always better than just saying you're super quiet. That's not very professional, and it's very direct, and you're just going to cause an argument by saying that.
Exactly. And it starts already with, I highlighted here deliberately some words that I would highly recommend you remove from your first sentence, because it starts on a negative mindset. So starting with negative sentences, I don't want this, I don't like this, the brain doesn't integrate the no. So it's like, it starts really negative with I don't want. So it's already whoa. And there's a judgment. This is not very professional. So I'm making a judgment by saying that. By the person staying silent, this is not very professional. But it's not true, actually. It's my judgment. But I make it as a truth. So this is already telling the person to defend themselves, because it's an insult. It could be taken as an insult. And then there's an extrapolating statement, which is usually when you find yourself using never, you never give me a compliment, or you always forget to do this. This is extrapolating, and this is also lead to an extreme conversation that will start to extrapolate and polarize.
You're going right to the extreme straight away.
Yeah. So a few tips here. Yeah, don't start the request with a negative statement. Remove all the judgments. So you can practice by writing what you have to say and then filter. So that's what I do usually. It's like, okay, not necessary, remove, and remove always and never. And then you have a very clean sentence. And so what is an NVC example? Starting with a framework, observation. I notice you stay silent about the news I shared. That's the observation. I noticed what has happened. And then the feeling and need. I feel anxious of not knowing what you are thinking and start to imagine the worst, like losing my job. That's all what's happening in my head, right? So that's me. And the request is, so I have shared actually the part, like all that part, this is how I communicate. Would you be willing to share further what is going through your mind? Because I just don't know. And that's, I'm making up already my own narrative, and it makes me anxious. But that I'm not blaming you, it's not your fault, but I'm asking you to give me more insights. And that's a much more inviting request, because then the focus suddenly is not about the other, but it's about you. So I'm the one owning the fact that I'm anxious, and I'm creating my own narrative, and I'm asking for help, actually. And then you will have actually the help when you approach the conversation like this, because the person is not trying to defend themselves, because you started with the attack.
Yeah. And it doesn't always need to reflect all the way down to like losing your job. It can just be like a disagreement on how to proceed in, like in the roadmap, for example, if that person has just stayed silent on expectations on what they want when you've been like delivering your presentation. And then there's different areas. It doesn't always have to go straight to the whole worst case scenario. It can be about smaller things as well, but going through your personal, what you've witnessed, then explaining your feelings around the situation and thoughts and so on, and then making a request after the fact just makes it very clear, rather than just being very direct with one of those previous statements as well.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about the example of losing the job, it's taken on real life example, because I have found myself receiving it where I was surprised at what was happening in the mind of the other person. So sometimes we don't know, everyone is in their own mental state and with, anxiety from different angles. You'd never know, actually. And then it explains the behavior, or sometimes like why they're a bit, triggered easily, what's going on, right? So it's very helpful as well as in a position of leadership to understand that when people are safe enough to share it with the right like vocabulary, it makes it easier, let's put it this way. But I have also used it on my end to talk in extreme, like how far I thought, because I was really missing insights, and like there's an environment of insecurity and lack of transparency where that was the thought that was on my mind, and that was what was creating the anxiety. Although I knew it wasn't true, but it was a good insight to tell the person that's where my mind is, so they have empathy to understand that it's a worrying topic for me.
Mm-hmm. Fair.
And at last, so this is really the end, like of a core content of a workshop, because I like to hear maybe testimonials or questions, and based also on practices, because I've led many teams and I can share maybe some insights. What can you do? Like taking away from what I shared today, I'm happy to share the presentation as well later for your network and so on. Yep. Use the framework, and this is like the most simple form I have found, because if you want to go complex and so on, but I like simple rules to create easily habits. And so it's an example of framework steps, and you just follow the script. And you just fill out with an empty, part, like when I na-na-na, see here, na-na-na, I feel na-na-na, because I need na-na-na, would you please na-na-na? And then you just, fill in the blanks and practice it, whatever you need to say. And that's my best advice. And it's like training a muscle. And after you've done it 10 times, 100 times, it'd be so much part of you that you won't even think about it. So that's, I would say, the easiest way to get there, to practicing. And if you want to go more into elaborated framework, there are other resources that I put there. It's the same steps, but it's a bit more elaborated, like if you want to be original about your approach. But the point is not about being original. And you have also other resources to widen your vocabulary of emotions and the needs you have, right? To understand really what are the theories behind it. Because today I'm delivering really more of a practical tool, but it's also helpful to understand the theory behind why it is a framework and why it's been built this way. And it touches more on psychology and human needs, etc. So if you really want to understand it fully, then just take the book, which I recommend. And it goes much more in detail of the whole background. And I recommend it highly for leaders, because then you have more of a depth to understand and explain and even train people in your team or who are around you. So my final thoughts is, like I said, it's like training. You have to go to the gym every day in practice, and that's the only way to incorporate it. And invite others to do it with you. So I would say the most effective way I've seen in workplace is when I deliver a training, everyone is aware that with the same knowledge and they start to talk about it. I like to use the NVC framework today in our conversation. Or I want to express something, I use the NVC framework and everyone is aware. So you're setting the stage already for others to receive and also to express the same way. And keep practicing. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you.
And it's got to start with leadership, doesn't it? You know what I mean? It's got to start from the top. And as long as all the leaders within an organization are on board with how to handle those conversations, and it's just going to make it a lot easier for team members to have those conversations with each other as well. So it's like a leading by example, so to speak, if that's the kind of culture that you're creating on how to address issues and disagreements using this method, rather than jumping straight to the whole, you're wrong, I don't believe you're doing this, XYZ. Yeah, if you create the culture of allowing people to express themselves properly, then there'll be less attrition. Do you know what I mean? People will be more comfortable, happier in the companies that they're at. So yeah, I totally agree. Love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sophie. So now is the time for the Q&A. So one of them was asking, can you share a personal experience when you successfully used nonviolent communication to resolve a conflict?
I think I remember at my time at Vodou, there was a change of management. A new management team coming in, and it created a lot of uncertainty, insecurity for us as a new studio. We were building the new casual studio, and with my new boss coming from King, there was a lot of new goals, expectation, and so on. And I was like, yes, okay, let's go. And then I was not really fully aligned or on supporting it, and I was really unsure, anxious about it, because I didn't know, okay, maybe our studio will shut down in a few months. So it started really to hit me inside and also affect my team, because even in the way I communicated, it was a bit unclear. So I had to do something about it. And I have tried a few times where I came and I was really like also nervous, and then I didn't make any sense of what I was saying. Probably that's how he received. And my boss was like, I don't understand what's happening, what you're doing. And it's like, so the conversation just didn't go through. So I was like just hitting a wall. And at some point I decided, you know what, I'll be vulnerable. I need to share how I'm feeling, because Otherwise, I'm just going around the pot, and then I'm not talking about the real issue. And I started the conversation with him when I was determined to clear what I needed. And the framework helped me. Like, I missed basically strategic goals. I missed the context. I missed the management discussion top down, like top management that were happening. That was a fact. And then I felt really like anxious. So admitting as well in a conversation with a boss, like he's like VP, of a department, it's very uncomfortable. But I took my chances and I said, I feel really anxious, insecure, because I'm questioning myself and my future here, when I don't know if my team will still be safe. And, I work really hard to build that team. I care about our future. So I would like to ask you, please, that information about this, the financials, and that actually the conversation went really well because the focus was exactly on my request. Mm-hmm. And then I had the insight, and then he told me, you're not going to close in 6 months, but if you don't meet the goals a year from now or with those numbers, there will be conversation where your studio might close. And that was actually more reassuring for me to know the time I had, the goals, what was expected of me, than not knowing anything and starting.
A hard conversation to hear, though.
In my head, yes.
At least there's some time frame involved, so you're not just guessing and going about your day as if nothing's wrong. Do you know what I mean? So.
And it helped me have structure because I was entering this conversation with the anxiety. So what was happening, then I could see the frustration of my former manager, and he was like, I don't understand. And so we were like just talking fluff for 30 minutes and not covering any topic. And so he was frustrated, I was. And then I said, at least I need to structure what I'm asking. And it's managing up basically. And that was very helpful as well. So you want to bring something to your boss. It's a very helpful framework. And it has its place to say, I feel something. You're not like saying I'm emotional, but you are sharing your feelings so the person can relate to your current situation.
Yeah, very cool. And we've also had a question in our Slack channel as well, which is, how do you approach these conversations when people aren't, the person on the other side of the conversation is resilient to this method? Because you can be approaching it in a very non-hostile way, but if they're just not in the mental state to receive that kind of conversation, it can just be combative. In how do you handle those situations where you just know the person you're speaking to just isn't gonna not conform but be on board with having that style of conversation?
The preparation or briefing of the conversation is actually very important before you get into the conversation. So even if the person is not on par or believe in the approach, you can always announce that, there's something really important for me to express or share with you because I feel hurt of something that has happened. And unless you have something really, like, I would say, not with good intention, everyone would care and say, oh, I heard another one, I'm going to listen, right? So you can start a conversation. This is something important for me to share, and I would like to use that framework I know of, if it has never been trained in the company. And you share like the simple framework because it helps me give structure. Would you agree to have a conversation and listen to what I have to say while I'm using this framework? So you ask consent before.
Yeah.
And I would say, with how I share it, I would be really surprised if someone really that is supposed to be a colleague and a good team collaborator saying no to this. And then if they say no, it's another problem if that person should even be in your team, because that means they don't care about you and your feelings, right? And that's I doubt that many people would consciously say, no, I'm not going to listen to you and acknowledge that I hurt that you are hurt, right?
Yeah. So this framework is very good for preparation of one-to-ones, meetings that you're planning on having, not currently in. So when we're dealing with trying to manage our, the language that we use, say that you're involved in a conversation that's already started, which, is just a meeting that's already been ongoing, and something gets brought up in that meeting, which has caused somebody to react in a combative way or of using violent communication, so to speak. If you don't have the time to prep that conversation, to say that we're going to use this framework, or previously say I want to have this kind of conversation, if you're in the middle of a conversation already and it starts going down that path, how do you suggest getting it back on track?
So that's also part of the perks of working remote. This is really tough because on site, you see when someone is upset. You see when there's like temperature up in the room, and it's like people start to interrupt each other, like raise the voice. So there are very strong signals when you see like emotion start to get and more judgment and not making any sense as well when talking. So when you are on site, you can catch those things. When you are like in a call, it's really hard, but there are a few cues again. Like you have a person starting to repeat themselves, interrupting each other, and like talking really fast. So you can catch those cues. And when you catch yourself in a group or one-on-one, it's like time out. Like one has to stop, the one being aware, like time out, I sense. So it's good to say I sense, so I perceive, I have the impression. So not to say we are emotional here, again, moving away from judgment. I have the impression that the conversation has escalated to some maybe non-productive or constructive talk. Could we
pausing the conversation and just saying,
yeah, so it's like take a step back and let's refocus. Or maybe should we use the framework to maybe understand, because I'm not understanding your point, I'm not understanding the issue. What is the blocker for you? I really try to understand, but I don't understand in this form. Should we try the NVC framework to understand what's the issue at stake here, right?
And I suppose if you use it enough, you don't need to say, should we try this framework? It should just come naturally after time to actually implement and use it.
Yeah, like that's the main thing here. Never work with assumptions. So it doesn't hurt to mention it.
Yeah.
So it's true that now I think for the people who have used it, because we are both aware, like we are both advocate of it, we don't need to announce it. And when we recognize, it's like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. And either we acknowledge, it's like, okay, we are talking in NVC, cool. Or we don't have to say anything, and it's like playing with. So I have noticed as well when people are using it, and sometimes I acknowledge, sometimes I don't. But then I know in which mode I should be, because I want to respect the fact that they had the courage to use it. You know, you want to encourage as well people to practice it.
Yeah, I totally agree. We got one question from Alessio. Is the point of this framework of bringing the status of the other person to a more human level?
Yes. So we are basically the title, because there's also a power dynamic and so on here. We are on the same level as humans with human needs. And so when you start to talk about your feeling, it doesn't matter what's the title of the other person or what's their position, because you can relate to them, to the emotions they have. If somebody tells you like, I'm very, very anxious, you know how it felt to feel very anxious. And then suddenly you can empathize for the other. And you can look at them as someone who's feeling really anxious, like your friend. And suddenly it changes the lens on how you receive and look at the person in a more human way. And that's really something I'd love to see a bit more in workplaces, because, I mean, we're just not here with a hat and a title and doing our work and logging off, right? We are fully whole with our emotions and whatever is going through our mind, our body during the day.
Sophie, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I'd say here the focus again is really to connect with your teammates or even anyone in your personal life. So it's really connecting on a human level, and it helps everything. Collaboration, business outcome, whatever result you want to look at, it just improves the quality of your life. So I highly recommend the framework. For me, it has changed a lot my life and my relationship.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to run this workshop today. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thanks so much. Cheers, Sophie. Bye.
Bye. Take care. Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. I am trying to grow a community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. So if you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders, because we have so much more we can learn from each other. Also, please don't forget to follow the show so you don't miss out on future content. Every episode is packed with actionable insights that will help you improve your leadership skills now. And if you are interested in learning more on the topics that we discussed today, you can find more insights on riseandplay.io, and there you will also find my free masterclass on conscious leadership. So, have a great week, and until the next time,